Rod in Durham, North Carolina. Hi.
Hey, Hank. Appreciate what you do, my man. Appreciate you putting yourself out there.
Thank you.
For Christians, buddy. My question is kind of twofold today. Is our Sunday school class at church, we're a bunch of hunters and fishermen, and we love studying the Word, and we've been going through what they call the Sermon on the Sea, where Jesus got in the boat and he shared 7 parables. And the questions that I have, and a couple of them, because I've had so many different ideas from people, I wanted your opinion on them. Number one is the bundles. When it talks about in the parable of the wheat and the tare, or the parable of the wheat and the weeds, when it gets to the bundling part, is that anything in particular, like maybe the mindset of the people today? Because these are Christians. I mean, these were Christians and people right beside them, so close that you couldn't tell them apart, and yet they're going to be pulled up and bundled. Is that something that maybe that's done before the end, where he bundles them up and then throws them in the fire at the end of the age? And then second question, this in the next parable where it talks about the mustard seed and how it grows. It starts as a little seed, but it grows into this magnificent plant, and these birds come and rest in it. This plant, is this, and I've heard so many different opinions, is this plant an abnormal growth of the church where it's gotten big, so big that the birds, like in the first parable where they went and ate the seeds off of the path, but now these same birds are in this tree? Or is this the tree that is the church that's grown from a little seed, and these birds represent the Christians that live in the tree? What's your opinion on these things?
Sure. I think what's really important is understanding the art and science of biblical interpretation. And part of that is to recognize that parables have a purpose, but you don't want to take the parable and make it walk on all fours. In other words, you don't want to try to read unintended meanings into the parables. The parable of the wheat and the tares is fairly self-explanatory. The wheat being those who are genuine believers, the tares being those who may look like the real thing, but in fact are not. And God is allowing the wheat and the tares to grow up together. And in the end, there'll be an eternal separation. So that happens ultimately when Jesus appears a second time. As far as the parable of the mustard seed is concerned, I think this is a very important parable. But the moment that you try to make it walk on all fours, it ends up being an absurdity. I wrote about this in my book, Has God Spoken, with respect to Professor Bart Ehrman, who's made a cottage industry out of ridiculing the historic Christian faith and debunking the Bible. In his view, the Bible is not legitimate, cannot be trusted. But one of the reasons that he can't trust it is because he can't read it. When he comes to this parable, he tries to make it walk on all fours. So here's how he does it. He says, Jesus says that the mustard seed is the smallest of all seeds. Well, we know that the mustard seed is not the smallest of all seeds. And therefore, Jesus was wrong. If Jesus was wrong, he couldn't be divine. And if the Bible's in error here, it cannot be trusted. And then he goes through this whole process of explaining how an orchid seed is smaller than a mustard seed. Well, of course it is. But that's not the point of the parable. The point of the parable is simply to say that the mustard seed is a very small seed, and it becomes a very large plant. In fact, the plant is so large that birds can nest in its branches. By the way, the orchid seed would not fill this parable very well because it doesn't grow into that large a bush or tree. So the idea behind the parable is that the kingdom starts very, very small and becomes very, very large. And to try to make it say a whole lot more than that is, again, to try to make a parable walk on all fours. And when you do that, you end up with all kinds of absurdities, very much Like when you take a metaphor, as I mentioned the other day, and say it's raining cats and dogs outside, and then someone starts asking me, well, what size are the cats and what color are the dogs? Well, once you do that, you end up missing the point of the metaphor. And a parable is an extended metaphor.